While the world watched aircraft carriers, fighter jets, and missile tests, China quietly patented a device specifically built to sever the most fortified underwater cables on the planet, tested a submarine so radically different that Western navies weren't even sure how to classify it, and started charging Taiwan's entire digital infrastructure toward a single point of failure that almost nobody outside a small circle of defense researchers noticed until this year. This is the story of the invisible war being fought at the bottom of the ocean, and why it might matter more than anything happening in the sky above it. Let's start with the part of this story that's easiest to overlook, because it's happening somewhere most people never think to look, on the seafloor thousands of feet below the surface, where a network of cables you've genuinely never seen carries almost the entire modern world. Roughly 99% of all international data, internet traffic, financial transactions, military communications, all of it moves not through satellites like most people assume, but through physical fiber optic cables laid across the ocean floor. It's an old technology in some ways, dating back to the earliest transatlantic telegraph cables, but it remains, to this day, the actual backbone of the entire connected world. And it turns out that backbone is a lot more vulnerable than most people ever stopped to consider until China started demonstrating exactly how vulnerable, one incident at a time. Let's talk about Taiwan first, because it's become the clearest, most concentrated example of exactly this kind of pressure. According to testimony delivered before the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission in March of this year by policy expert Jason Hasu, Taiwan depends on just 24 undersea fiber optic cables, all landing at only 8 physical stations along its coastline. That's an extraordinarily concentrated point of vulnerability for an entire country's digital infrastructure. According to Hsu's testimony, cutting just 3 major cable clusters near a specific choke point called the Bashi Channel could immediately eliminate 99% of Taiwan's entire digital bandwidth. Not slow it down, not disrupt it partially. 99% gone almost instantly. Now let's talk about how this kind of sabotage actually happens in practice, because it's genuinely clever in how deniable it's designed to be. According to Hsu's testimony, Chinese civilian vessels have been documented systematically severing these cables using something called anchor dragging, essentially letting a ship's anchor drag along the seafloor in a way that looks, on the surface, almost exactly like an accident, a careless or poorly trained crew failing to properly secure their anchor while transiting through the area. That built-in deniability is exactly what makes this such an effective, frustrating tactic to respond to. It's genuinely difficult to prove, with full legal certainty, that any single cable-cutting incident was deliberate sabotage rather than simple maritime negligence, and China has consistently denied any intentional involvement in these incidents. But here's where the pattern becomes impossible to dismiss as coincidence. According to reporting from Defense News, Taiwan has documented 5 separate cases of seabed cable damage just this year alone, compared to only 3 incidents recorded in each of the 2 previous years combined. Taiwan's own Coast Guard has responded by building a formal blacklist of nearly 100 suspicious China-linked vessels operating in the waters around the island. One specific case involving a Togolese-flagged cargo vessel called the Hong Tai 58, crewed by Chinese sailors, actually resulted in criminal charges being filed against the ship's captain by Taiwanese authorities this year for deliberately damaging an underwater communications cable connecting Taiwan to the nearby Penghu Islands. That marks a genuinely significant escalation in how seriously Taiwan is now treating these incidents, moving from quiet monitoring to actual criminal prosecution. And this pattern isn't limited to just Taiwan either. According to NBC News reporting, similar incidents involving suspected Russian and Chinese vessels have been documented damaging critical undersea cables in the Baltic Sea as well, prompting NATO to launch a dedicated response initiative called Baltic Sentry, specifically authorizing member states to take action against ships suspected of posing this exact kind of security threat. An associate research fellow at Singapore's Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies, Ian Lee Huiyuan, explained the core danger in genuinely stark terms, noting that if enough cables were cut simultaneously, the result could potentially be something as severe as a complete internet blackout for an entire region. Now here's the detail that pushes this story from concerning to genuinely alarming, because this isn't just about ships accidentally, or not so accidentally, dragging anchors across the seafloor anymore. According to reporting from Just Security, just weeks after Taiwan seized that Hong Tai 58 vessel, media investigations revealed that a state-owned Chinese research organization called the China Ship Scientific Research Center had filed a patent for a deep-sea device specifically described as capable of severing the world's most fortified underwater communication, or power lines. Read that description again. Not a device that might accidentally damage a cable while performing some other legitimate task. A device specifically designed, engineered, and patented for the explicit purpose of cutting through the most heavily protected undersea cables that currently exist anywhere on the planet. Think about what that actually represents. This isn't circumstantial evidence, a suspicious pattern of incidents that could theoretically be explained away as coincidence or negligence. This is a formal, publicly filed patent, submitted by a state-owned Chinese research institution, for a tool whose stated purpose is explicitly to cut through the strongest undersea cable protections in existence. That's about as close to a smoking gun as you're likely to find in this kind of gray zone military and intelligence activity, where most actions are deliberately designed to remain deniable and ambiguous. Let's connect this to the broader picture of what China has been building underwater more generally, because the cable-cutting patent doesn't exist in isolation. It fits into a much larger, sustained pattern of Chinese investment in deep-sea technology and capability. According to detailed reporting from Asia Times, China has developed and begun testing what's being described as a sailless submarine, a genuinely unusual design that removes the traditional conning tower, or sail, that sits atop most conventional submarines. This isn't just a minor engineering curiosity. According to that same reporting, this kind of vessel is specifically suited to operating around and potentially threatening exactly the kind of undersea cable infrastructure that Taiwan and other countries depend on, precisely because of how it can be used to approach and manipulate seafloor infrastructure with a different operational profile than conventional submarine designs. There's also a broader deep-sea program worth understanding here. According to reporting from the Geostrata, China commemorated the 77th anniversary of its Navy in April of this year by highlighting what state media specifically described as bridging the last mile in deep-sea operational capability, historically a domain dominated almost exclusively by a small handful of Western powers and specialized commercial firms. The same reporting describes tests conducted in April as representing a critical milestone in China's deep-sea ambitions, specifically involving operations at depths exceeding 3,000 meters, depths that were, until very recently, essentially inaccessible to routine Chinese naval and research operations. Now, it's worth being genuinely fair and balanced here, because not every piece of this puzzle points toward China holding an overwhelming, unchallenged advantage in this specific domain. According to a June 2025 analysis published by the Center for International Maritime Security, written by researcher Ryan Martinson, there are real limitations to China's undersea capabilities that deserve honest acknowledgement. Citing Chinese military journal articles directly, Martinson notes that China's own naval publications acknowledge the PLA Navy cannot actually guarantee reliable submarine stealth, specifically because of what these Chinese sources themselves describe as a pervasive American undersea surveillance network. According to these Chinese military assessments, the waters within what's called the First Island Chain, essentially China's near seas, have become highly transparent to American detection capability, thanks to a comprehensive network of satellites, fixed seabed sonar arrays, and maritime patrol aircraft that together create what Chinese sources describe as an extremely high probability that Chinese submarines get detected almost immediately upon leaving port. That's a genuinely important counterbalance to keep in mind, because it means China's undersea ambitions, however rapidly they're expanding, still operate within real significant constraints imposed by existing American surveillance infrastructure. According to that same analysis, even if China attempted a mass submarine breakout using its full fleet of nuclear-powered vessels, which numbered 32 as of January of this year, that kind of attempt could create what defense analysts describe as predictable fatal funnels, concentrated choke points, where American and Allied forces would have a significant tactical advantage in detecting and potentially neutralizing those vessels. So the honest, complete picture here isn't one of total, unchecked Chinese dominance in undersea warfare. It's a picture of a genuinely fast-moving, significant expansion in Chinese capability, specifically in the gray zone tactics of cable sabotage and deep-sea infrastructure manipulation, happening alongside real, documented limitations in more conventional submarine stealth and open ocean naval competition with the United States. Let's talk about why this specific combination, gray zone cable sabotage paired with rapidly advancing deep-sea technology, represents such a genuinely underappreciated threat, according to the experts studying it most closely. Jason Shu's testimony didn't stop at simply describing the vulnerability. He warned specifically that a coordinated digital blockade targeting Taiwan's cable infrastructure would paralyze global semiconductor supply chains, disrupt international financial markets, freeze government operations, and sever vital allied military communications. Think about the scale of that potential cascading impact for a moment. Taiwan produces the overwhelming majority of the world's most advanced semiconductor chips, the components that power everything from smartphones to military systems to artificial intelligence infrastructure worldwide. If Taiwan's own digital connectivity were suddenly severed through a coordinated cable-cutting operation, the ripple effects wouldn't stay contained to Taiwan itself. They would extend outward through global supply chains, financial systems, and military coordination networks that depend, whether people realize it or not, on Taiwan remaining digitally connected to the rest of the world. And here's what makes this threat genuinely difficult to counter using traditional military deterrence, according to Just Security's analysis of the situation. This kind of sabotage represents part of a broader pattern the report describes as maritime lawlessness, one that extends well beyond just China, noting suspected coordination between Russia's so-called shadow fleet of vessels and Chinese activity, specifically targeting European undersea cables as well. The report specifically warns that a major coordinated Chinese attack on the trans-Pacific cable network surrounding Taiwan could trigger consequences extending far beyond just destabilizing the global economy, potentially marking an actual shift toward direct military conflict, since severing Taiwan's cable infrastructure would very likely be interpreted correctly as a deliberate act of aggression rather than some kind of ambiguous accident. Let's talk about how the United States and its allies are actually trying to respond to this specific threat, because there is real active work happening to counter exactly this kind of vulnerability, even if it hasn't generated the same level of public attention as more visible military developments. According to reporting on Taiwan's own countermeasures, Taipei has established what's described as an interagency response platform specifically focused on this threat, alongside legislative reforms, upgraded security protocols, and the deployment of something called the Submarine Cable Automatic Warning System, designed to improve real-time threat detection and alerting when suspicious vessel activity occurs near critical cable infrastructure. Taiwan's Coast Guard has also significantly increased vessel inspections and ongoing monitoring throughout the region. But, according to that same reporting, even with these real, meaningful efforts, the scale and complexity of the overall challenge genuinely exceeds Taiwan's own individual capacity to fully address, especially given that the risks here extend well beyond just Taiwan's own territorial waters, implicating much broader regional and genuinely global interests. There's also an interesting diplomatic dimension to this entire story worth understanding, because it hasn't been entirely absent from high-level discussions between Washington and Beijing. According to analysis from the U.S.-China Perception Monitor, submarine cable security actually became a genuine test case during the May 2026 summit between President Trump and President Xi Jinping, specifically examining whether the kind of strategic stability language typically found in diplomatic communiques could actually translate into real operational guardrails in a domain where a single deliberate act of sabotage has the potential to sever markets, militaries, and entire civilian populations simultaneously. That analysis raises a genuinely important, unresolved question whether two governments that fundamentally distrust each other on almost every other major strategic issue can still find a way to agree on narrow, specific procedures, protecting a domain where both countries, despite their broader rivalry, share a genuine mutual vulnerability. Let's also touch on the American military's own growing concern about this exact domain, because it's not just civilian infrastructure experts and academic researchers raising these alarms. According to reporting from the Washington Times, Rear Admiral Mike Brooks, intelligence director at the Navy's National Maritime Intelligence Integration Office, testified before Congress this year that the Chinese People's Liberation Army is actively seeking to dominate the entire undersea warfare domain, warning that within coming years, China could pose a genuinely credible threat to America's own long-standing submarine advantage. That's a senior American naval intelligence official testifying directly to Congress, confirming that this isn't some fringe concern limited to academic defense journals. It's an assessment shared at the very highest levels of American naval intelligence. So let's bring this all the way back to the central question sitting at the heart of this entire story. Why did this particular threat slip past so much public attention for so long, when the actual evidence documented cable-cutting incidents, a formerly patented cable-severing device, rapidly advancing deep-sea submarine technology, and direct congressional testimony from senior naval intelligence officials paint such a genuinely serious and well-documented picture? Part of the answer likely comes down to simple visibility. A fighter jet transit through the Taiwan Strait generates dramatic footage and immediate, visceral headlines. A cargo ship's anchor mysteriously dragging along the seafloor thousands of feet below the surface, in a way specifically designed to look like an accident, generates almost none of that same visible, immediate public attention, even when the underlying strategic threat it represents may ultimately prove considerably more consequential. That's really the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath this entire story. The most dangerous moves aren't always the ones that generate the most dramatic headlines or the most viral footage. Sometimes they're the ones deliberately engineered to look boring, accidental, and forgettable, happening quietly at the bottom of the ocean on infrastructure most people never think about until the exact moment it suddenly stops working. So where does this leave things right now, as of the most recent information available? Taiwan continues documenting new cable damage incidents at a pace significantly higher than in previous years, while simultaneously building out new detection and response systems specifically designed to counter this exact threat. China continues advancing its deep-sea technological capability, including submarine designs and cable manipulation tools that didn't exist in any meaningful operational form just a few years ago. American naval intelligence officials continue publicly warning Congress about the seriousness of this exact domain. And diplomatic efforts between Washington and Beijing continue attempting, with genuinely uncertain success so far, to establish some kind of operational guardrails around a threat that both countries understand carries the potential for consequences extending far beyond any single incident, straight into the realm of full economic and military crisis. If this story raised as many questions for you as it did for me while putting it together, drop a comment below and let me know what you think should actually be done to protect this kind of critical undersea infrastructure going forward. Do you believe diplomatic guardrails between the US and China can genuinely hold in this specific domain? Or do you think this kind of gray zone sabotage is simply going to keep escalating regardless of any formal agreements? I read every single comment, and I want to hear your honest take on this one. And if you found this breakdown valuable, share it with someone who needs to understand just how much of the modern world genuinely depends on infrastructure sitting quietly and increasingly vulnerably at the bottom of the ocean. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next update the moment new developments come out on this story, because based on everything we just covered, this is far from finished. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.